Okay, so this will be session kind of point 5. Move my mic over here. In this experiment, so welcome back to our Heroes of Hommlet. In session 1, we began by creating 6 characters randomly, and we got most things right. I think given the amount of rust I have on my player's handbook and first edition AD&D skills, it wasn't a total train wreck, but we did miss a few things. A couple of you even pointed out in the comments a couple of those misses. So the first thing that we missed, so just to give a recap, we created 6 characters, and this series will essentially be broken up into 2 pieces. The first will be a behind-the-screen solo roleplay using first edition Dungeons & Dragons playthrough of the Temple of Elemental Evil. And the idea will be to take the results from that solo playthrough on YouTube and provide strictly narrative ride-along podcast, audio only, of that adventure. So we'll go ahead and very much like some of the solo roleplay podcasts out there that are actively doing the role play behind the screen in the dark of their basements, we'll actually do that on YouTube, and then we'll go ahead and derive our narrative podcast from it. So in the first session, we went ahead and created some characters. We got decent scores. We ended up with a party of 6, but we did make some errors. So I just want to go through real quick and correct, to the best of my ability, the errors that I made in the creation of those 6 characters. And just as a reminder, we created, and you'll see here, we created 6 characters. We created a human cleric of St. Cuthbert, a human magic user, a half-orc fighter, a dwarf fighter thief, a halfling thief, and a human ranger. As you can see up here, this were our stat arrays. And like I said, we got most everything right, but we did screw up a few things. So first thing, let's start with our halfling thief. Our halfling thief was mostly correct. Actually, let's start with our half-orc fighter. That was an easy one. I just simply forgot to give myself a constitution buff. So the constitution on that half-orc fighter should in fact have been 14, not 13. Due to the bonus, and I'll show you some character sheets I've made that corrected that, but that was an easy miss. Other than that, not a whole lot different. Not a whole lot of difference there, besides our moribund 19 that we rolled on our exceptional strength. And then I also made an error on our halfling, and this was a more subtle one. And the reason I found out about this error wasn't necessarily because I'm smart or well-read, but I was actually thinking to myself, oh, well, what I may want to do here is get a copy of Osric in front of myself because, again, it's not the original, but it is a really well-made index that is, and I'll bring up Osric here. The idea behind Osric is that it is a sort of a non-interpretive view on first edition. It is simply a re-indexing of the rules of first edition in a more organized fashion without really altering much of the content is the intent. And the other intent of Osric, of course, was to use the SRD / Open Gaming license to allow the new publication of first edition adventures, right? So Osric, awesome contribution by Stuart Marshall, Matt Finch, who came up with the idea. And so Osric provides a vehicle for you to write first edition adventures, first edition compatible adventures, using those gaming licenses. So I thought to myself, well, it may just be good to have a copy of Osric on hand since it is arguably a better indexed version of first edition than first edition. And as I was just going through the first few pages in character creation, I actually noticed that the halfling, I'm going to get down to the halfling here, H for halfling, that the halfling had +3 bonus, as you can see here, +3 bonus with a bow or a sling, which sounds pretty good. And so I thought to myself, where in the world did that come from? And I surely missed it. And I kind of did miss it. Man, I wish I had a mouse that worked. I'll work on that. But you can see down here, bonus +3 bonus attacks with bow or sling, which works out really well for our thief. And I thought to myself, what did I do wrong? So I went back to the player's handbook, and what I did wrong, not morally wrong, but just wrong, was I just failed to read the first paragraph. And the end of the first paragraph says, complete information on halflings is found in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. Now you might say to yourself, man, DM Ned Leeds, as a player, you shouldn't have the Monster Manual, you know? And this is the player's handbook. If you had the Monster Manual, you could look up the stats of the monsters, which surely wasn't the intention of the creator, Gary Gygax. But it is what it is. If you look in the Monster Manual, in fact, which I guess we might as well do as we rub salt in the wounds of my errors here. If we check out the halfling in here, sure enough, the halfling in here, boy, oh boy, what a world I live in with this mouse. All right. If we go down here to the H's, we can see where the error of our ways, in fact, was. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. This is riveting, I know. H. All right, here they are, the halflings. Oops, that's a hill giant. Yeah, we won't be role playing a hill giant. A, B, C, D, F, G, H. So halfling. And here we are. Special attacks, +3 with bow or sling. And so this can be justified probably in a couple of ways. One is that it's what Gary Gygax wrote, so therefore it's law. And then two would be they're small, so when striking at larger characters, you should get a bonus because you're small and they're bigger. So that's the other way kind of to justify it. So that's where that comes from, and so I guess I'll take it. Our thief overall is not the most impressive thief that has ever graced the Flanays, so, you know, I think it's fine. Let me move this over. And so he'll have a +3 bonus to hit. And also what I've done, let me go ahead and real quick transition over here. What I've done is put these characters into some individual character record sheets. This is a form fillable one I found on the internet, and it has most of the combat stats. It doesn't have really anything for equipment. So, and I had one more error, which a commenter was kind enough to point out, and that is that rangers, for all the pain of creating a ranger and the scores that are required, they do have the benefit of being very survivable at first level because they are gifted with 2 hit dice at first level. So they don't get the D10 of a fighter, they get a D8. However, hidden up here, you will see that they get 2 hit dice at first level. So, again, pretty big deal that you get 2 rather than 1 at first level. So you can see it's some tiny text up there, but yeah. So great catch by that commenter. Okay, so I also thought to myself, I'm kind of cheating by giving max hit points at first level. So that could be 8, plus 8 is 16, plus 2 would be, for my Constitution bonus, would be 18. That seems really rich. I think I'll just settle for the the max hit points without the bonus. So 16 hit points is quite a lot at first level. So we'll go ahead and make his starting hit points 16. I gave some names to my characters as well. And one thing we will be doing is we're actually going to begin the initial in media res scene that won't be random. It'll be a scene that I set up. From there, everything that kind of happens from there on in will be very much at the mercy of the dice. But we will put our characters in an initial scene to just kickstart the adventure, because they have to start somewhere. And we'll be starting the campaign with 3 characters in play, and that would be our halfling thief, our fighter thief dwarf, and our human ranger. And so I guess let's just walk through those characters, and we'll get into the specifics of their equipment and so on and so forth. But just to reiterate their character sheets. So now I've started this ranger. I also rolled up some names. So our ranger's name is Finn Briggs. He is a ranger, human, 25, 6'1", 210. He chose for his just to round out our character creation, we did have some things to do. First thing we had to do was we had to go ahead and choose our proficiencies. So as a ranger, he gets 3 proficiencies at level 1. In AD&D First Edition, essentially what happens is that you are either proficient in a weapon, and a weapon in this case is a narrow definition of weapon, so not swords but long swords. So you'll choose N proficiencies, where N is the number of proficiencies that Gary tells you that you have, which is dictated here in the player's handbook in the equipment section on this little table. Little table here. So clerics get 2, so we have a cleric. Fighter gets 4, paladin, ranger get 3, magic user, emir 1, thief 2. So those are our classes. In the case of the multi-class character, you choose the better of the 2. So our dwarf, fighter, thief will get the benefit of 4 proficiencies. And then you can see a progression here. You'll get more as you advance in levels. And then you have this punishment here. So if you pick up and try to use a weapon that you are not proficient with, you will receive a penalty to your die roll. So, if you want to say the fighter gets no benefits in this game. Well, this is a pretty big benefit. You get 4 weapons proficiencies, more than anybody. You get this nice -2. You do get them kind of quickly. You're still probably not as good as a paladin or a ranger, but you do level up slightly faster. Also, to go to Osric, there's some optional rules for fighter and fighters in Osric. I'm not convinced that I'll use those, and I'm not even really sure where they came from. If I can identify where they came from, I may incorporate them in, but I believe they may have come from a later supplement or something like Unearthed Arcana that we don't want to touch. Not because it's not a good book, but because I really don't want to overcomplicate things. So that's where proficiencies come from, and those are choices that I have to make as the player. So my ranger has chosen longsword, hand axe, heavy crossbow as his 3 proficiencies. So you may be asking yourself, well, why did you pick heavy crossbow? It's terrible. Because it's thematic, I like it, and there is a house rule that I will add, and that is that if you have a cocked and loaded heavy crossbow in your hand, you may fire it before initiative, as long as you're not surprised. And that's a pretty common house rule. It is a house rule that I had even in the 90s when I was playing this game. So it has one small advantage in that it's essentially a loaded, cocked weapon. You don't have to knock an arrow. It's just sitting there pointed in front of you. So as long as you're not surprised, you get to fire off that shot early in the round. So I want my ranger to have some ranged weapon, and so I chose heavy crossbow. The other ones I chose were longsword, which is a pretty common pick for a fighter. It's probably arguably the best overall melee weapon for a fighter. And then I picked hand axe, which is kind of a rangery thing to have, chopping wood in the woods, making furniture. It's also nice. It's a little bit flexible in that you can throw it. You may also be asking yourself, if you play more modern games, well, what about rangers in 2-weapon fighting? Well, the answer there is that anyone can 2-weapon fight in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. However, you suffer a -4 and a -2 penalty, so you can get an extra attack. But your first attack, your primary weapon, big hand, will be -2. your offhand will be -4. The offhand has to be a dagger or a hand axe. So if he wants to go 2-weapon, having the proficiency of hand axe is helpful there. That it can be muted by a high enough dexterity. In this case, my ranger doesn't have that. So there may be a situation in which the dwarf, who actually has a really high dexterity, may want to fight with 2 weapons. But we'll get to that when we get to it. My other class features here are that I get a +1 damage versus quote-unquote giant class creatures. This is a weird term that's used in the AD&D Player's Handbook. It includes things like goblins, which aren't exactly giant. The Osric rulebook codifies it slightly differently, I believe, and this may have been like a Dragon article that changed it. The quote-unquote giant class creatures here are codified as, they're calling it humanoids, and this is actually listed in the Player's Handbook. I just think calling it humanoids is just more sensible, because it includes orcs and goblins and giants. So evil humanoid or giantish opponents. That's what they're calling it here. Doesn't apply to missile attacks, only applies to melee. So we'll go with that definition here. We'll call them evil humanoids. In later editions, this would be things like favorite enemy. So tracking, again, we'll get into that if it matters. And then we surprise others on 1 to 3. We're only surprised on a 1. In this case, we're in Greyhawk. My ranger worships the god Biori. I started him off with a large shield and studded leather armor. I didn't do a strict roll of gold pieces and a shopping spree. I kind of just equipped him with what I think they should have at the start of the story. So in this case, it's these weapons, and we'll get into equipment at some point. I thought I qualified for the 10% bonus, but you will see that that is in fact not the case. I need a 16 plus in all of these things, which seems completely ridiculous. So I in fact will not get my 10% XP bonus. So let's just get rid of those. All right. I have chosen Common, Elvish, Gnomish, Orcish, and Nolish for my languages. We'll figure out how that fits in the story. Yeah, and everybody's Thaco in AD&D First Edition of First Level is 20. So you can see here that I've got a little bit of a Thaco progression table. Other than that, the saves, for a fighter and a ranger are really bad in First Edition. And I think that's about it for him. So that would make his AC 6. Yeah. So that's Finn Briggs. He will be our ranger. Pretty survivable. Hits pretty hard here. Hits with a longsword for a D8, +1 damage, +1 to hit. Yeah, so that's our ranger. All right, our fighter thief. Let's do our fighter thief next, because he's going to start the story as well. The initial party again will be these three. So Garl Soliforge, he's our fighter thief. He's a 1/1, neutral good dwarf. Because he's a thief, he can only be neutral good. He's a dwarf. His intelligence of 10 gives him a maximum of 2 languages. As I read the rules, you get Thieves' Cant no matter what if you're a thief. So he has Common, Thieves' Cant, Dwarven, which he has to pick because he's dwarf. I've also picked Gnomish. And things that we could choose as a fighter, I got to choose a number of proficiencies. So I chose shortbow. Dwarves can't use longbows in AD&D. I chose dagger, spear, and battle axe. He worships a god who's a little bit more obscure. He's a Sulis god named Fortubo, who often presents himself as a gnome or a dwarf. He's kind of obscure. You could have picked Moradin or one of the more thievy gods, but this guy seemed pretty cool. He's a little bit more obscure. There's a Dragon article, Dragon 85, that talks a little bit about him. So I can get into the lore on him, but he'll have leather armor as well. So again, you can't do thiefy things if you're in fightery armor. So he'll wear leather. Again, first level thief gets a backstab at +4 with double damage. He also has some stuff associated with being a dwarf, +1 to hit versus basically orcs, goblins, and then giants, who also includes ogres and trolls, are -4 to hit him. Again, dwarves make awesome thieves because not only do they get chances to detect things with their dwarviness, but they also get a chance to detect things with their thieviness. So something like a stone or a pit trap, he gets really 2 shots at it by the book. We also stuffed a lot of constitution into this guy. So we get a +4 bonus to poison, Ronstaff's wands, and spells. So pretty decent saving throws for a first edition or for a first level guy. This guy's defense armor class is going to end up being 6, 8 for his leather armor, and then -2 for his defensive adjustment. So back to my weapons that I chose for this guy: spear, dagger, short bow. I also have proficiency in battle axe. I don't currently have one. But generally he's going to roll out with his spear or his dagger or his short bow. And he will get a +1 to missile fire, either throwing his spear, throwing his daggers, or shooting with his short bow. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and this is not true of Basic, I believe. It isn't true of Basic. A lot of the bows, short bow specifically, have a rate of fire of more than 1, meaning he can fire a short bow twice in a round. Now, getting off missile attacks in AD&D can be a little bit more difficult, but still a nice option to be able to fire twice in a round, even as a first level character. Thaco of 20. He doesn't, unfortunately, he does qualify. Multi-class characters can't qualify for the XP bonus. So even though he has a con of 17, he won't get a 10% bonus for his thiefy experience. So when looking at his thief skills, again, much maligned over the years, the chance of actually doing anything productive as a thief. Some of it is, in fact, pretty laughable. Hear noise, hide in shadow, move silently. But he's got a respectable chance to open locks, pick pockets, remove traps, climb walls. And those are modified by racial, so dwarf, and dexterity adjustment here. So that's Garl Sullyforge, sort of in character, in world. He's going to actually have a prior relationship with both the ranger and the halfling. And so that's why they're all kind of going to start together immediately. So let's go through the halfling. Here's our halfling thief. We didn't get the greatest stats here. We didn't really get great stats for our magic user. We didn't really get particularly impressive stats, despite the 46 drop lowest, order how you want for a thief, but hopefully he'll live long enough to advance, since thieves can advance quickly. He's neutral good, thief. Again, we gave him the 6 hit points. He's reasonably intelligent. He's got intelligence of 3, so he knows common, thieves, can't, halfling, dwarven, gnome-ish, and goblin. There's a reason for all these folks knowing gnomish. They're going to start off in a city called Verbabonk. Verbabonk's got a large gnome presence in the Greyhawk lore. It's very close to a place called the Cron Hills, and the Cron Hills are like a gnome enclave that's friendly to civilization, has helped them fight back the humanoids in years past during what was known as the Hateful Wars. So that's why a lot of folks, if you lived in Verbobonk, there's a good chance you knew some gnomish from trading with the gnomes. So things we didn't really choose that halflings just get are very similar to dwarf. You're going to get a bonus to your saving throws based on your constitution. So not bad. +3 to poison, rod, staff, wand, and spell. And thieves in first edition AD&D compared to fighters anyway have a pretty decent set of saving throws. Strangely enough, their breath weapon save is miserable, and I always think to myself, like, thieves really should be tumbling and rolling out of the way and getting out of the way of dragon breath. But no, he's as good as roasted if he encounters a dragon. We ended up with a small defensive adjustment for our dex of 15, which we even got adjusted up for being a halfling. Decent charisma, right? So this halfling may end up being our face person. So that defensive adjustment plus our leather armor puts us at AC 7. Again, Infravision 60. We get some dwarvy type stuff. We can detect slope. We can detect direction. If we're alone and hanging out, we surprise on a 4 out of 6. So pretty good to be a halfling thief in that if you sneak ahead alone, let's say there's a guard kind of just hanging out, and you sneak ahead alone, you may have a pretty good chance to surprise that guard, in which case you'd actually be able to leverage your backstab, which can sometimes be tough to do. This particular halfling worships a god called, I'm going to butcher this, but Farlongen, which is like the god of kind of like the road, and he's a little bit of a trickster himself, so he worships this god. He wears leather armor. Thieves get 2 proficiencies. I chose sling and short sword, so those were definitely choices I could make. And I'm equipped here with a short sword, and I'm equipped with a sling. And then again, as I said, I made a slight omission or error, and then I'm going to get a +6 to hit with said sling, which again, first level's pretty decent. The sling in AD&D doesn't weigh a whole lot. Does a minimum of 2 damage, which is nice. I know 1d4 + 1 doesn't seem like much, but at least you can't get wonned out. Does only have a rate of fire of 1, has a reasonable range. So range in AD&D in the book, you'll see it listed sometimes in inches. An inch is 10 feet. So I've put feet here because when we eventually get down and start playing, I'll likely be counting out feet on graph paper. So I'm going to translate everything to feet. We are just 15. 16 would get us an experience point bonus. We didn't get it. Our dex is too poor to even qualify for a thief skill bonus, but we did get some thief skills from our racial adjustments as a thief. So a single class thief, what he or she has going for him or her is they do advance kind of quickly, right? So again, much maligned thieves, not the greatest class it's ever graced Dungeons and Dragons, but the thief does advance pretty quickly. So you can see here, look at this shirtless ruffian sticking up this poor merchant here. I mean, this guy can't afford shoes. He's got a tribal tattoo on his right arm, and he's got this rusty dagger. But he got himself some loot here, so hopefully he's going to level up soon and get a shirt. But you can see 1250 is all you need to go to the second level. So, hopefully Balding Pot here, will live long enough to get himself some XP. Okay, so those are our 3 characters. We do have one more thing we need to roll for, which I neglected to do on the previous example. And that is secondary skills. So secondary skills are a first edition artifact that exist because we are not using non-weapon proficiencies. So again, AD&D first edition, there are a bunch of books you can add on. Wilderness Survival Guide, Dungeoneer Survival Guide, Unearthed Arcana, even Oriental Adventures is a one AD&D adjacent book. In some of those books, they added the concept of non-weapon proficiencies. This would pretty much be the de facto thing in second edition. I know technically it's an optional rule, but it was strongly encouraged to use non-weapon proficiencies. Non-weapon proficiencies are a vestige of skills, and essentially they say, hey, you have the skill of riding, and by choosing this or using slots, your character, based on their intelligence, is allocated a number of non-weapon proficiency slots. You would pick riding, and then the majority of them, some of them weren't, but the majority of them would then be attached to an attribute, and then you would essentially test that attribute by rolling that attribute or lower on a d20 in order to flex the skill or use the skill. So I'm not using non-weapon proficiencies. Instead, I will use the secondary skills table because it's a random table. So we're going to go ahead back to our characters, and we're going to go ahead and roll up some non-professional skills. And so what Gary tells us here is that when a player selects a class, this profession is assumed to be that which the character has been following previously, virtually to the exclusion of all other activities. So at first level, but you may have some minor knowledge of something you did in your early years, right? So I like the idea. I think it's a happy medium in terms of skill. skill system. It just gives a little bit of background, and it's another chance for us to randomly roll dice. So Gary says assign a skill randomly, which hell yeah, we're going to do it randomly, and see what we get. And you can see there's a chance that you will have no skill of measurable worth, which is certainly hilarious. And the fact that Gary's on all caps here is amazing as well. So let's go ahead and transition over to our dice roller. And you can see we have our percentile dice. So we'll go ahead and do it for our characters here that we have in front of us, our 3 starting characters. And we're going to go ahead and do a little rolling on this awesome table. All right, so for Finn Briggs, his secondary skill will be 16. Forester. I mean, are the gods not smiling here? We have a ranger, and he had Forester. Very good. Pretty cool. What else would a ranger have, right? All right, our dwarf. Let's see what our dwarf gets. Our dwarf will get, you know, he's going to be a shipwright or something totally absurd for a dwarf. 64. And that would be a trapper or a furrier. Very cool. Could be useful. Furrier, not to be confused with furry. Okay. Last but not least, we have our halfling. What did our halfling do in a prior life? Maybe he was a drunkard. Let's see. We have brewer? No, we don't have brewer. We have gambler. Man, I want to pick gambler for my halfling. All right, well, we're doing the dice here, so. All right, I've rolled a 13. He's a fisher. Excellent. So he can make a net. He can fish. Makes sense. Halfling sitting on the pond, skipping rocks, catching fish. Just like, didn't Smeagol? Wasn't he hanging out fishing with his buddy when he found the One Ring? So we're absolutely on brand here. All right. Okay. So those are our 3 starting guys. I think we've got everything as far as the things that we need to roll for. I believe that is it. Yeah. I believe that is it. Okay. So, a few things we have left to do. The first is that we need to actually give them sort of some starting equipment. And we will not be using gold and a shopping spree. We're just going to equip them with some equipment that makes sense and is useful in the campaign. And that'll become more clear when we begin. I'm not actually going to worry about the equipment for the guys who aren't actually starting. So we're going to go ahead and grab character. So really it's character 4, 5, and 6 are what we're going to start the adventure with. Now we know this guy's name is Garl Sollyforge. Okay. We're just going to say gear here. And so we know we have leather armor. We know we have a short bow. We know we have a spear. Let's go over to our sheet, sorry. Yeah, at a minimum we have this stuff, right? Okay. We know we have a spear. We know we have a dagger. I'm actually going to rule that this guy, he is no stranger to, he's a thief, and he's a fighter. And his background, actually, he and Balding Pot, the halfling, they have run kind of a bit of a game around the greater Vermabunk area, mostly robbing the rich occasionally, robbing evil folks. Living a relatively clean life. They're both neutral good, but they are thieves. And what I'm going to rule here is that he has on his person 1d4 daggers, right? So he's got a nice collection of daggers that he keeps in his belt and his boots. The guy's a rogue, so oops, roll it in my little dice tray here. All right, so 2. We got 2 showing. All right, I'm going to rule that he's got 2 daggers. So he's got one he keeps on his hip, and then he's got a second one that he keeps in his boot for, and he occasionally, if he gets searched or whatever, he can hide it. Okay, so I have 2 daggers. I will rule that he has 2d10 arrows. So I'll do this randomly. I'm going to sum these 2. So he's got himself a dozen arrows for his short bow. Yeah. All right. So that's kind of his core gear, his weapons. He's going to have a leather backpack. And sorry, we're going to go to. Let's go ahead over here to our. We're gonna stick to the player's handbook. It's got a decent amount of gear, just adventuring gear, or whatever. I'm not gonna worry about clothes. This isn't Queer Eye for the Straight Guy or Queer Eye for the Straight Adventurer, Straight Dwarf. So I'm not going to worry about clothes. I'm going to assume everybody has sort of shoes and stuff. Again, the story may dictate otherwise. But we're going to assume everybody is fully clothed, unlike our shirtless rogue in the picture there. So we'll focus mostly here on this left-hand thing, which is he calls it miscellaneous equipment and items. It's funny, in the player's handbook, you will also notice that there's basically no description of any of this crap. So you were expected, as a 6-year-old in 1978 or 77, whenever this came out, 79, to just know. Gary just assumed, that 8-year-old me would know what a tallow candle was or what a tinderbox was, which is awesome. So anyway, let's go ahead and grab some gear here. So we're going to need a leather backpack for sure. We're going to have, we know we have a quiver to keep those arrows in. No good thief would ever leave home without 50 feet of rope. We're going to assume that he has 1d4 sacks. So we'll say small sack times 4 for thieving. He's a dwarf. I'm not necessarily sure that he would need a tinderbox and flint. He's got infravision. Although infravision doesn't really allow you to read or anything. Yeah. Well. So thieves' tools. I'll say he has a water skin. Sure. I don't see why he wouldn't have a tinderbox. He and Baldwin Pot are often on the road. They're often camping. Worst case, they want to make a cook fire, right? So we're just going to call it a tinderbox. We don't, the other stuff here. And then we will say that it's about it. Let's say just kind of on his person, he keeps 1d6 iron rations, 3. In case he has to beat it quickly. Which is not, you live in the life of a thief in Vermabunk, and the constabulary gets on your butt. You may have to bolt fairly quickly. Okay, so that's basically some interesting adventuring gear for him to have. I'll say he keeps a few candles to go ahead and read. I'll give him he's got a softer side. I'm going to give him a book of Dwarven. He's got a book of Dwarven mining lore. That's what he reads. That's what he reads by fireside. So, okay, so that's enough gear, I think, for him. No transport. Yeah, again, he's got leather armor. We'll figure out, exactly the specifics of his weapons, but, maybe we'll give him a little bit of character, but I think this is about it. Okay, let's go on to our next guy, who's our thief. Should actually be pretty similar. So I'm going to just copy this bottom piece. Yeah, our thief. And our thief has also has leather armor, has a sling, has a short sword. So in AD&D, there's a thing called sling bullets, right? So you can pick up rocks off the ground for free, but bullets are, I don't know, either the really good rocks or rocks that have kind of been chipped away at to form aerodynamic bullets that do way better damage. So kind of same thing here. We'll do. I don't see any reason why I wouldn't have a nice sack full of these. We'll say. I just want to roll some dice here. So let's say. I'm overthinking this. All right, let's just sum all these dice and see what comes up. Oh my God! All right, so 29 sling stones, bullets. Sorry. All right. Yeah, thief without a dagger is kind of weird, but it is what it is. But he's gonna, anyway, he may have a knife or something. And then I'll paste in our standard adventuring gear here. In this case, he's also a thief, and he doesn't need the quiver. I will rule that he has, instead of small sack, I'll say he's got 3 belt pouches, or 4 belt pouches, sorry. He's like Cable, he's got infinite pouches, but that's where he kind of can keep those sling bullets. I will roll his rations, so let's do that. He's a fat little halfling. He's eaten a lot of his rations. I will say, instead of a book of dwarven mining lore, I will rule that he has a pipe. And he has 1d6 tufts of tobacco, so he's got tobacco times 3. What else should I should do this on live so I can get suggestions from folks. Okay, I'm a mid-career halfling thief in Verbabonk, and I know my way around the greater Flanaise area. What would I be reading? Would I even be reading anything? I'm actually pretty intelligent. So I'm going to say he has a small book of halfling proverbs and poetry. I'll also say, he's out on the road a whole bunch too. He has a bedroll. And a wooden symbol of Far Lang HN. Far Lang HN. There we go. Okay. So he wears that around his neck. It's kind of his good luck charm, etc., etc., etc. So, but other than that, pretty much the same thing. He's got some rope, backpack, water skin, tools. And we'll get into encumbrance in a minute, but I think we're pretty safe here. And the encumbrance rules in AD&D really only punish you when you're fully encumbered, in terms of being surprised and other stuff that you can and can't do. All right. So we have Balding Pot. He's pretty filled out. Get him a pig. Get him an ox. Y'all better ox somebody. Let me see here. Yeah, I don't really see. He's not a cleric. He's not gonna be able to use the. He isn't gonna be able to use that holy symbol to do anything other than to pray quietly to himself. But I'll give it to him regardless. Okay, And let's finish out with our ranger. Our ranger, as noted, he has a decent amount of gear. You know, this guy, he lives mostly outdoors. He goes into the city to trade and occasionally meet up with friends, but for the most part, he spends almost all of his time in the wilderness. So he has his studded leather armor. He has a shield. So shields in AD&D give you just a flat -1 bonus, +1, -1, potato, potato, tomato, tomato, ascending, descending. It gives you a -1 to your AC, which is good in AD&D because Gary Gygax. Actually learned why descending armor class exists. If you guys want to know, if you don't, just delete this channel forever. But apparently, it's a vestige of wargaming, where the armor in wargaming, specifically in naval combat, a class 1 was considered the best. So 1 was good. Class 4 armor on the side of your ship was bad or worse than class 1 armor. Maybe people in the comments can confirm whether or not that's true or not, but I thought it was interesting because, you know, when you're really thinking about these things, you're like, these people are very smart, savvy folks who invented these games. They were into it. There had to be a reason why they decided lower was better. And so yeah, that. As I understand it, that was the reason. But I certainly could be proven wrong. Okay, so I have a shield. But back to the shields, you can have a small shield, a normal shield, and a large shield. Besides the encumbrance, it's probably best to just have a large shield. If you're going to do longsword and shield, you might as well do large shield. Large shield here is 15 gold. Strangely enough, I couldn't find in the player's handbook the weight of armor. It's in Osric, but I couldn't actually find it in here. But we're going to give Finn Briggs, our ranger, we're going to give him a large, I'm going to say it's a large wooden shield, just to give it a little bit more detail. They actually don't differentiate between metal shields and wooden shields in basic. Okay, he's got a long sword. All one word. He's going to have his heavy crossbow. We're going to name that crossbow. I love crossbows. He's proficient with a hand axe. We're going to give him a hand axe. And he's also proficient with... Oh, you know what? Just to quickly dovetail into our secondary skills, let's go ahead and give... Right? I mean, the guy knows how to fish. Why wouldn't he in his gear just have a fishing line? We'll say fishing line, hooks, and a small filleting knife, right? Balding Pot is an avid fisherman. And in fact, he's going to earn thousands and thousands and thousands of gold, and he is going to retire on the near div or the whatever lake in the Flanays somewhere. He's going to build himself a little burrow, find himself a beautiful halfling wife, settle down, and just be a fisherman. Or he's going to die on the end of a hobgoblin spear, be spit roast on a fire, and eaten half alive, right? Anything can happen. So what did our dwarf have as a secondary skill? He was a furrier and a trapper. Pretty cool. So we'll go ahead and give him something related to his secondary skills as well. We'll say he has 1d6 small game snares. Game snares. 4, and then we'll say he has a skinning knife, you know, straight out of the Revenant. Okay. Okay, cool. And so we have our hand axe. Our ranger, again, living outdoors, making bucks, working outside, making bucks, fucking A. What does it really make sense for him to have? Yeah, I mean, he would probably have a skinning life too, living off the land. He's a forester. He already kind of has a hand axe. And again, player's handbook here. Keep in mind, we don't have like a massive equipment list. Okay, let's keep this reasonably simple. All right, that's his weapons. Oh, heavy bolts. Let's do the same thing, kind of like, somewhere between 20 and 30 bolts. We got 16 plus 5 is 21 bolts. Heavy bolts. Or quarrel, depending on what book you're reading. Yeah. We got 21. 1 in the chamber, 20 in the clip. All right. All right, he's going to also have a leather backpack. I should probably just copy paste this stuff. Leather backpack. He will have, so he does not have infravision. So it would make sense that he would have some lantern oil, right? He's got 2 flasks of oil. Flask of oil times 2. He has a hooded lantern. He has a tinder box. He has a bedroll. He's used to having to deal with being outside a lot. He's gonna have 1d4 wine skins. He's got 3 water skin times 3. He knows the value of having water outdoors. He's a forester. What else would a forester have? I mean, I have a saw, but that to me is a bit bulky. What else this guy could have? No one is necessarily going to start with like a war horse. Sorry for vacillating on this. It's probably irrelevant, but I'll give him a map case as well, right? So he's got some maps. He has a map case, and I'll say instead of books, he has maps of the greater Furyandi area, right? So this area around Verbabank, and again, just to not to get into, but if you get into the adventure, the adventure takes place in a spoilers. Gen Con's happening. Spoilers, big spoilers there. Let's see, big spoilers. All right, where's our? I thought we had a map of the greater Furyandi. Guess we don't. I thought we did. Let's see. Oh, for the love of. I have no idea why this doesn't do anything. Let's see. Click. Rename. Sure. Oh, that's useless. All right. Yeah, I thought we had a map of the Furyandi. I can bring it up. But my whole point is that if he was a ranger, right, and he's hanging around, and he's been hanging around, then he would know, where things were around the area. There's no reason to think that he. Oh, I know why. So here's some lore for you. Okay. So this module, T1, the Village of Hommlet, came out before T1 through 4. There is no published T2, T3, and T4. So this module was sort of a learning module or a beginner. I'll call it a beginner module. I would consider sort of the
Opinions may differ, but I would call this a somewhat intermediate module that would be above a real starter basic scenario. So like for me, a simple basic scenario is something like the ones that come in the basic sets. So Tower of Xenopus, the Haunted Keep, probably the greatest one ever to teach a DM how to actually learn to DM would be Frank Menser's in the red box in Beckme, which is Castle Mystamere, and the Choose Your Own Adventure there. Those to me are like big time learning modules that an 8-year-old could get his or her head around. The next level up would be like Keep on the Borderlands, In Search of the Unknown. Those are, again, written with a novice DM in mind, and they're filled with hints, right, and other tips for the DM, and they expect you to sort of read along. Village of Hommlet is definitely a starter module, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily geared towards like a first time DM. It's introductory to novice level, but it's very sandboxy, and if you just drop this into the lap of a DM who had never DM'd before, and this came out in 1981, it has a lot of room to customize, right? And so I would put it somewhat higher on the level. It's definitely a novice or a beginner module in that the PCs are expected to be first level, but it's not simple for sure. So anyway, you may be asking yourself, what about T2, T3? Well, T2, T3 don't exist. Instead, it was released as a mega module here called T1 through 4, right? And so Gary was off. I guess we're done rolling dice. So Gary was off in California making the D&D cartoon and trying to get a movie done. They needed revenue. He sent his notes to Frank Menser, who's one of the goats, and Frank went and actually put together this masterpiece, and essentially collected Gary's notes and created a detailed super module on the back of Village of Hommlet. So this super adventure contains the Village of Hommlet, but it also contains kind of everything else. Spoilers. All right. And this came out in 85? 85, right? So the quote-unquote long-awaited Ultimate Campaign adventure. A sinister force long thought destroyed stirs from the black hole that spawned it. Like an ebony darkness, it prowls the land, and safety is but an illusion, for it watches from every shadow, ponders possibilities. What began years ago before Gary left for Hollywood with the introduction of players to the quiet village of Hommlet and the amazing lands of Greyhawk, at last is complete. So, this was a pretty huge deal to release this, and a lot of people consider it to be the greatest of the AD&D adventures. Definitely, people can disagree, agree to disagree, but it enhanced a little bit of the Village of Hommlet stuff module, but again, it really just bookended it with a bunch of extra parts. And the thing I was searching for in the original module was this map. So now here we are. And so this just sort of shows the greater, and again, I know some of you know this like the back of your hand, but these hexes are actually a zoomed in version of the Greyhawk maps, which shipped with a product that was originally called the Greyhawk Folio, will later be branded the Greyhawk World of Greyhawk box set, called the Gold Box, not to be confused with the SSI Gold Box games. But if you search around on YouTube, you can find some really amazing channels that detail the product history of Greyhawk. Captain Courageous would be one. Greyhawk Grognard would be another one to really go check out as far as Greyhawk lore. I'm probably forgetting somebody who's done an amazing job on detailing Greyhawk. But anyway, my point being is that this map is a zoomed-in feature in the famous Darlene maps, of which I have a few copies physically here. I've got some signed copies from her. It's a zoomed-in chunk of that World of Greyhawk, that famous, iconic, beautiful work of art Greyhawk map. And this adventure kind of is focused in this area here, which is
in and around this city of Verbabank, which borders this river. And again, we have a number of smaller rivers that go through Hommlet. There's another village here called Nolb. And all of this was to say that my ranger is active in this area, right? So he's very familiar with the Cron Hills, Verbabank, this river, this forest. To the east is the gnarly forest. He'd be familiar with that as well. So I'm going to assume he has over the years in his rangering come up with a number of maps, and these will help him not get lost when making his way back and forth through the woods. There are a number of roads, the high road here and the low road, creatively named, that allow one to traverse between Verbabank and Hommlet down here, right? Okay, and as you can see, this giant crossbar here isn't a road or a feature, it's the fucking hex, like zoomed in, right? So a hex in this case is, they use leagues, 10 leagues, but the zoomed in version here is 10 leagues. Okay. Sorry, that was a lot. That was a lot for me to justify why my ranger has a map case. So we should feel good. All right, I'm also going to give my ranger some chalk. I'm going to give my ranger a small canvas tent, a skinning knife, sorry, I realize we're missing the thrill of notepad here. Okay, a skinning knife, what does my ranger like to do? Does he like to read anything? He just loves the woods. He loves animals. He loves, he just loves being outside. He's a real protector of the forest. He's chaotic good. So, he's roaming around trying to right wrongs. He's helping travelers. He's on the lookout for bandits on the low road or the high road. He has a number of contacts in Verbabank. Again, we're going to figure that out as we start the adventure. But I think this is probably it for what he would have. He's living outside. I'm going to say he has a small cooking pot. Which will have no bearing on the story whatsoever. All right. Seems pretty good here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and let's go ahead and transition back here. We'll do a quick time check. We're at 1 hour and 3 minutes. So I think that's really all we need to get started. We have okay. Go ahead back to our DMG. Yeah, if you ever want a table for disease, the DMG is your source for parasitic infections. The amount of stuff that's who hasn't had a GI problem? Who hasn't had a skin affliction? Who hasn't drank some bad water and had a urinary system disorder, right? Some of this stuff is breathtakingly amazing. So another thing that we need to figure out before we get started is, let me put something more interesting on the screen for us to stare at while we talk. There it is. All right. Okay. So another thing that we should review in just a few minutes, just as I wrote some physical notes out, is how are we going to sort of do PC decision making? And a lot of these podcasts behind the screen, they use oracles, they use a simple D6. I think we'll probably stick to a flow chart that looks something like, when I've played enough D&D over the last 40 years. What would the player characters reasonably do, I think, is our number one thing. If there's an obvious choice, we will make the obvious choice. The next thing we'll do is lean into alignment, right? And so if there's a little bit of hesitation, this character's chaotic good. Would they risk their life to do this, or would it fit their alignment? The third thing we'll look at is we'll start to flesh out backstories. Some of these solo roleplay podcasts have done amazing jobs of really creating characters with a lot of meat on the story bone, to the point where you're truly deflated when they get killed. I'm happy to do that, and I will do that. But we'll sort of do that as the story evolves, because, again, if a character dies in the first scene, at the first crossbow bolt from the first orc, then I've wasted time giving you a 30-minute prologue about Balding Pot Gold Leaf's time in the Shire. So we'll refrain from doing that until we sort of get into the story. But if something in their backstory makes sense for them to push in a certain direction, let's lean on that. So we will, about fourth or fifth down the list, I think we'll have an oracle. So there's a simple D6 oracle we can use. I also have access to a number of random generators. One I lean on heavily in my own gaming is something called Sandbox Generator. And perhaps when I figure out how to use YouTube, I'll put it in the show notes. But really a great resource for a number of sort of random events. So that one's really good. So I think between those two things, using a simple kind of D6 oracle as well as a tool like Sandbox Generator, we should be able to get through most of the situations where I wouldn't necessarily have a clear right answer that the player would make at the table. So again, I know there's things like Mythic and there's very complicated GM oracles, but since we're playing a published adventure, we don't necessarily need the girth, I think, of something like a Worlds Without Number, X Without Number, Mythic Emulator, anything like that. I don't actually need to really generate a ton of extra material as I have a published adventure. So the published adventure, and I guess we can take a big step back. I mean, Temple of Elemental Evil is a published adventure that does have a sort of a finite goal at the end, but I would say it's definitely not like a Pathfinder or a modern 3X, 3.5, 3.0, 4E, especially 5E linear adventure path where you're riding a rail car, going from scene to scene, eventually killing Strahd at the end. It's got a very, very distinct sandboxy element. I will propel the group forward, but once they sort of get into the meat of the adventure, we may use some randomness here and there to figure out which direction they go. But again, we'll cross that bridge, when we get to it. I also noted that I am starting the story with only 3 characters. Well, that's because I do have a very planned in media res way to kick off this campaign, and I've used it in pen and paper. So I've run this adventure, this module, once in first edition / books I had second edition when I was in high school. I've run this again, rules as written, for the Pathfinder beta when the entire world threw 4th edition into the wood chipper. We actually switched from 3.5 to the Pathfinder beta, so I used Temple of Elemental Evil to run the beta. So I did that for a number of years. We had a very long campaign there, so I know it from that. I've played the video game 1,000 times. So I know the adventure pretty well, and I should be able to quickly move the party in and out of the parts of the adventure while kind of driving the overall meta plot forward. Obviously, the title of the module kind of gives it away. There is a temple. It's evil, and elements are involved, so spoilers there. They'll end up in the village of Hommlet, or perhaps they'll die on the road in the first episode. But my point is that I have a very specific in media res start that I've used in pen and paper that gets the party into the action and provides them with meaningful choices to propel the story forward. So, and for that, I need about 3 characters. And so it will be the ranger
the thief and the fighter thief, and they're going to be in an evening market in Verbobank, where they've agreed to meet up, and the incentive there is that the ranger comes into Verbobank to trade goods. So he'll have venison, he'll have a number of things that he's gathered in the woods, and he needs other supplies, things like oil, other things that he can really only get in a city market. And he'll have a prior relationship with Balding Pot and Garl. Garl and Balding Pot are kind of partners in crime. As I said earlier, they're gonna, have a light kind of thievery. They're running a game, selling, trading goods. They're gonna have a cart and probably a mule, and a thing is going to happen. There's going to be a scene, and then we'll see kind of where it goes. And I think actually now we've got everything we need to do that. So the other characters are half-orc fighter, our magic user, our cleric. They're there in the world, and we're going to encounter them one way or another. I'll figure out a way to work them into the story. But they will be encountered, and they'll be part of the party. It's just that we're going to work them in kind of naturally as the story evolves. So I think we're at an hour 10. So we got our characters. I think we have everything we need to adventure. So the next one we should actually be adventuring. My plan there is I've got another boom. So what I may do is we definitely want an overhead for the dice, because I really want to do this with real dice on the camera, right? Because I don't think I would cheat, but by doing it on camera with the dice, I just don't even give myself the option. So I'm going to go ahead and do it with real dice on the camera here, assuming it can stay focused. And then we're going to go ahead and figure out how we want to use the rest of the real estate, again, on the behind-the-screen portion. Again, whole goal here is we'll run this thing like an RPG. We're going to take those cliff notes as we're writing down what's happening, and we're going to drive this narrated audio-only podcast, which hopefully I can be a good enough voice actor to do. And so just figuring out how to use our screen real estate during the solo play aspect, I think, is important. If you watch channels like, I encourage you to check out Solo Dungeon Crawler. One of my favorite series of Tom, DM Tom's, is he did an AD&D, and he did these really nice hand-drawn maps of the area, which I thought were fantastic. And so he was drawing the map out by hand on graph paper, and using an overhead boom and his far superior video editing skills than me to really immerse. So I think we'll probably do something like that. I want to do a hand-sketched thing. So I'll have an overhead boom, and we'll go ahead and have a piece of butcher paper with some drawings on it. And there are a number of really cool old helper sheets, I guess is what I would call them, that I use all the time in pen and paper. One of them is called the Adventurer's Log. Let me see if I can bring it up here. It's one of my favorites. And the idea there was just, it's difficult to imagine this, but back in the day, a photocopy machine was actually considered sort of a luxury, and it can be difficult to find one. Maybe your town didn't actually had one photocopy machine. It may have cost like $1 to get a photocopy if you weren't fortunate enough to have one at a business or at a school or whatever. So they would actually sell books of character sheets. They would sell books of blank character sheets, and I have a shitload of them. It was cheaper than actually going and getting copies. So we're probably going to use a number of those. One of my favorites that was ever created was a thing called two are my favorites. Dungeon Master's Design Kit by Aaron Alston is probably my all-time favorite. It's got the greatest sheets ever, and it came with a fuck ton of them in the booklet. But another really, really cool one was called the Dungeon Master's Adventure Log. So we'll likely use those as well. I know I have these digital character sheets, and they're like really upsetting, but for the purposes of just trying to
to show what's happening here, I kind of needed the PDF one, so I apologize in advance for those. But we'll go ahead, once we get the overhead boom on the butcher paper, hopefully we'll be able to see clearly the pen and paper in front of me. So we'll probably switch to these bad boys. If you're not familiar with this, I highly recommend that you check out this product for a number of reasons. One, if you can get your hands on a physical one with like some coffee stains and fucking vintage Doritos dust from 1984, that's amazing. It also had a number of really cool shortcuts. So it had these really cool modifiers, which is similar to what's on the screen, but this product, if you had this is a great cheat sheet just for various mods, right? Very, very cool stuff. Again, a lot of this stuff is buried in the DM's guide or in the player's handbook, but great intoxication. Who knew that it was, if you were absolutely piss drunk, that you'd be -5 to hit. Giant for small, right? Dwarven hatred, gnomish hatred. Again, awesome resource. I had this when I was young. It was very cool. I initially bought it just to get the sheets, and I didn't actually know it came with this this kind of DM screen light stuff here. So, anyway, awesome product. I highly recommend you either get the PDF or you buy the physical one off of eBay. Really, really cool stuff. So avoiding encounters, counter distance. It's got shortcuts for encounter reactions. The famous lost segments portion of the rules, where if you're surprised, the difference on the dice determines the number of lost segments. We're going to get into are we going to get into segments? You're going to have more segments than an orange farm on this podcast here. Listening at doors, shortcut. Pretty cool chart here on how much a cleric would charge you to cure disease. I mean, what a world where you're generating 1,000 GP. Imagine you're a paladin. You're just the gross GDP of all the paladins in the D&D world would just be insane. $10,000 to control weather. What a deal, right? Give me rain. Everybody pitches in. All of our crops get rain. Anyway, sorry. This thing's awesome. What I'm really getting at is the sheets that are in it. So, what this thing gave you were these. First of all, it gave you this. If you were a DM, you could shorthand your whole party onto this sheet, so that you knew kind of what hit points they had, what their armor class was, and so on and so forth, so you don't have to keep asking them. The other awesome thing that it had were these encounter sheets. And very cool way to, first of all, track light, get the party's marching order, and then you as the DM could shorthand the monsters here. So either on the fly, you have a wandering monster, you can go ahead and quickly sketch it in here, or if you had a predetermined encounter, you could get a couple of these sheets together, right? Pre-stat out your encounters, and then you could just go ahead and use this. Each one of these could kind of represent an encounter, so that when you do your bookkeeping afterwards, you would have known what happened. And this is the butt end of this thing. You have this shorthand of lost, all the rules around how you actually deal with a hex crawl. And again, it's so funny. Some of these newer OSR products and things, they're great, and I don't begrudge anybody for making them, but all this stuff was pretty much already here. I mean, if you just had these products, it gave you all the tools you need to do a hex crawl right here. How far do you go? If you get lost, how do you determine the hex in which you would end up? What are the chances of actually having an encounter based on the time of day and the type of terrain? This was like a $5 booklet supplement. It gave you everything you need to do an outdoor hex crawl. Just awesome stuff. So here's one that's filled out, kind of like sample logs. So you can see here. Let me rotate this. These are all, of course, Easter eggs for Dave Zeb Cook. Helen Cook, no relation? I don't really know. I'll have to ask him.
Steve Marsh, of course. Some of these folks are all luminaries or early testers in Tom Moldvay, Rebecca Moldvay, Yolan Moldvay, Lawrence Schick, Gene Wells. These are all early TSR employees. Anyway, their characters are all here. Morgan Ironwolf, of course, from BX Basic. L. Ron Hubbard. Harry Furryfoot. We have Black Dougal, the infamous Black Dougal. Fred 9802. But anyway, so you as the DM would put together this kind of thing. You'd have shorthand for how many hit points they had. And then here you've got a sample encounter. All right, well, encounter number 1, they fought 4 gargoyles. Encounter number 6, they fought, 5. This is fucking brutal. Yeah, so imagine this as your wandering monster random D12 roll. But anyway, so you can see here, here's what happened to this party while they were wandering through. You can see poor Black Dougal, who always gets the short end of the stick, got slain by a fire giant. Sister Rebecca Rip, she fell in valiant combat with a black dragon. So I'll probably use this. This was a whole lot of minutes spent on nothing here, but I want to get the pen and paper feel as down as I can. So we'll use real paper printouts here of these tools, and hopefully that'll give a kind of a cool experience. So okay, I think that about wraps it up. Don't subscribe. I don't have enough content. You can like this video and add a comment, but I'm probably not worth subscribing to. But if you want to subscribe, I guess you can. I don't really need the money. I don't really need the subscribes, but if you want to, I guess you can. And I guess it'll actually tell you when I get the next one off the ground here. So in the meantime, if you are listening and looking online, then great. I appreciate it. And next session, we have our characters. We have our character sheets. We have everything we need to go. We will need to obviously generate the content. So the next session will be our first sort of in-game session. It'll be a solo roleplay session. And again, that should generate enough content for us to then go make or for me to go make the audio portion of it. So I appreciate everybody watching, and